I always thought of myself as a calm and rational person, never the type to get caught up in wild conspiracy theories or jump to conclusions without evidence. My name is Connor, and for 10 years I believed my marriage was built on love and trust. My wife, Natalie, had always been the charismatic heartbeat of every gathering, while I played the steady partner who stood at her side. We met in college, introduced by a mutual friend who insisted we were perfect for each other, and for the longest time, I believed that to be true. It never crossed my mind that the woman I cherished might harbor a hidden agenda. It's painful to recount how she carefully orchestrated a plan to turn me into the villain so she could be the victim in a melodrama of her own making. This story is the raw, unvarnished truth of how I discovered that Natalie, with the help of her best friend, planned to label me as a cheater and dissolve our marriage, all so she could reunite with her high school sweetheart. The betrayal hit me like a hurricane, and in the aftermath, I learned that not all storms pass quietly. I remember the first time I sensed something was off. It was a shift in Natalie's behavior. She began to hover over her phone more often, especially late at night. She'd mumble something about an old friend needing advice or about her best friend, Elizabeth, sending some meme. At first, I dismissed these oddities as normal social updates, but soon, her phone habits got weirder. She'd lock the screen the moment I entered the room, or she'd abruptly excuse herself to take calls outside. I noticed that she spent an unusual amount of time texting whenever we were supposed to be relaxing together. Though I believed we had nothing but trust between us, a small voice in my head urged me to stay alert. At night, she grew distant, her touch lacking the warmth it once held. I tried to convince myself it was just stress or fatigue. After all, she was juggling a demanding marketing job and balancing friendships. However, something in my gut insisted there was more to her behavior than typical anxiety or overwork. I just never imagined that the friend she texted so often was her former high school flame, and that Elizabeth was helping her hide it. My suspicions grew stronger the day I found a cryptic note tucked under the passenger seat of our car. It was scrawled in messy handwriting, saying something like, "Next weekend?" with a heart drawn beside it. I confronted Natalie, hoping she would laugh it off as a silly joke. Instead, she became defensive, claiming it was from an old colleague who wanted to plan a group outing. She offered no details, no clarifications, just a string of vague half-truths that left me uneasy. Around that time, Elizabeth started dropping by more often, always armed with convenient excuses to pull Natalie away on urgent errands or girls' nights. They'd come back hours later, giggling conspiratorially about inside jokes. I never suspected Elizabeth would become the architect of my downfall, but looking back, she was always whispering in Natalie's ear about how she deserved better. Whenever I asked Elizabeth about her visits, she would smile that saccharine smile of hers and say she simply loved our company. Yet I could never shake the feeling that the two of them shared a secret, a code that excluded me from their circle. My trust was stretched thin, but still I desperately clung to hope. One night, after Natalie had fallen asleep, I felt a wave of anxiety so intense that I got up to pace the living room. A part of me felt guilty for doubting her, yet the growing evidence was hard to dismiss. The note in the car, the late-night texting, Elizabeth's sudden increase in visits. Something told me that I was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. So I did something I had never done before. I checked Natalie's phone while she slept. My hands trembled as I carefully lifted it off the nightstand. Her passcode was still our anniversary date, a choice she had once said was a testament to her devotion. I guess that devotion had an expiration date. My heart pounded as I opened her messages, half hoping I was being paranoid. The first texts that popped up were from Elizabeth, asking if she had set things up yet and telling her not to worry because he'll slip eventually. Though I didn't fully understand the context, I knew they were talking about me. I scrolled further and found an entire thread absolutely dedicated to discrediting me, complete with strategies on how to capture evidence of my fabricated betrayal. I felt sick to my stomach and my vision blurred with anger and disbelief. They were discussing ways to plant incriminating text messages on my phone, hints about hiring someone to send flirtatious emails from a fake account, and even suggestions to manipulate photos. Elizabeth kept emphasizing that all they needed was a single gotcha moment. Natalie responded with hesitation in some messages, but in others, she was disturbingly enthusiastic. She wrote about wanting to end our marriage without looking like the bad guy, and about reuniting with someone named Aaron, her high school ex. She seemed giddy at the prospect of reigniting old flames. My entire world flipped upside down in that moment. The woman I thought I knew was actively conspiring against me. Even worse, she was conspiring with her best friend, a person I'd trusted enough to invite to my home, to share meals with, to celebrate birthdays and holidays. The betrayal was suffocating. My cheeks burned, my temples throbbed, and I fought the urge to wake Natalie up right then and there to confront her. But I knew I needed more concrete proof, and I needed time to plan my next steps carefully. I refused to act rashly. In the days that followed, I installed a small security camera in our living room, hidden behind a decorative vase on the bookshelf. I also set up an app on my phone to automatically back up any photos or recordings to a secret cloud account. It felt wrong to spy on my own wife, but I knew I had to protect myself from whatever scheme they were cooking up. My paranoia reached new heights when I overheard Natalie and Elizabeth discussing some elaborate plan to drug me at a party so I'd appear incoherent in compromising photos. Their voices were low, but the threat was undeniable. Elizabeth insisted it would be the final nail in my coffin, the absolute proof Natalie needed to leave me guilt-free. That's when I realized this wasn't just a casual fling or a messy marital issue. It was a calculated plan to ruin my reputation. My despair morphed into cold fury. I began documenting every suspicious move, every phone call, every text, every meeting. I consulted a lawyer friend in secret, explaining I feared being framed for infidelity. He advised me to gather as much evidence as possible before making any drastic moves. He warned me. I felt conflicted about confronting Natalie right away. Part of me was desperate for answers. Another part wanted to see just how far she would go. She started acting overly sweet, as if sensing my suspicion. She cooked dinners, left affectionate notes on my desk, and even suggested we take a weekend trip together, something she rarely did before. I forced myself to smile and play along, all the while capturing every suspicious interaction on camera. My facade of ignorance was my best weapon. One evening, while she was showering, I checked her phone again. This time, I found messages to Aaron. They were explicit, filled with memories of their teenage romance and fantasies about a future together. The thread mentioned how she was almost ready to break free and how Aaron couldn't wait to have her in his arms again. Stomach churning, I snapped screenshots and forwarded them to my hidden cloud drive. Later that night, I noticed Natalie scowling at her phone, obviously frustrated by something Elizabeth had messaged her. I only caught a glimpse of words like timing and get it done soon. My nerves were on a knife's edge, but I hid it behind a practiced calm. The moment everything turned even darker was the night of a supposed work gathering that Natalie claimed she absolutely had to attend. She dressed up more seductively than I'd seen in years, spritzed on perfume I didn't even know she owned, and left without so much as a goodbye kiss. I followed her in my car, keeping a safe distance. My heart hammered the entire drive. She didn't go to any restaurant or hotel conference room. She pulled into the driveway of a suburban house I didn't recognize. 10 minutes later, Elizabeth arrived in her car and joined Natalie at the door. Through binoculars, I saw them being greeted by a man who matched Aaron's social media photos. They disappeared inside, lights illuminating silhouettes through drawn curtains. My stomach twisted in knots as I imagined them finalizing plans to stage my downfall, or worse, having a romantic tryst. I recorded the address and took photos of their cars parked side by side. After about 2 hours, Elizabeth left alone, but Natalie stayed behind. I texted her, pretending to be curious about how the work gathering was going, and she replied with an elaborate lie about dull speeches and boring office politics. That night, I returned home before Natalie did. Instead of unleashing my anger, I busied myself transferring all the footage and photographs onto an external hard drive. When she finally walked in, she looked flushed and smelled like a mix of liquor and expensive cologne. I asked how her evening went, and she rattled off a rehearsed tale about meeting new clients. I nodded politely, my gut churning at the blatant lies. After she went to bed, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long she thought she could keep this charade going. The next day, Elizabeth dropped by unannounced. I pretended to be heading out, but lingered in the hallway to listen. She and Natalie discussed how close they were to breaking me and how the photos from the upcoming event would serve as incontrovertible proof of my unfaithfulness. My blood ran cold when I heard them mention drugging my drink again. Clearly, that was still on the table. Elizabeth insisted the plan had to go off flawlessly, especially now that Natalie suspected I might be getting suspicious. They laughed, confident that I was entirely clueless. If only they knew. I decided that enough was enough. I arranged a meeting with my lawyer friend and laid out all the evidence: text screenshots, audio recordings, camera footage, and photographs of Natalie's rendezvous with Aaron. His eyes widened as he realized the extent of the plot. We crafted a strategy. First, secure my financial interests and personal belongings. Second, gather undeniable proof of their next move. Third, confront them in a setting where the truth could be exposed. I transferred money into a separate bank account, just in case. I also made sure to copy all the incriminating files onto multiple drives, storing them in safe places. My lawyer emphasized the importance of timing. If we moved too soon, Natalie and Elizabeth might shift tactics or destroy evidence. So I waited, impatient but focused. My hands shook every time I saw Natalie texting or whispering with Elizabeth. I was living in a house of lies, pretending to be oblivious. At night, I'd lie awake, replaying their words in my head, imagining how they laughed at my supposed ignorance. The knowledge of their betrayal weighed on me like a physical burden, but my determination for justice kept me going. I completely refused to crumble. My patience paid off sooner than expected. Elizabeth texted Natalie about some gala event, presumably the final stage of their setup. Natalie told me about the gala as though it were a sudden invitation from her boss, emphasizing how important it was for us to attend together. Immediately, I knew they planned to execute their scheme there: spike my drink, arrange compromising photos, and maybe lure me into a secluded corner with some hired temptress. I played my part, acting excited about a night out. On the evening of the gala, I wore a hidden camera embedded in a button on my jacket. My lawyer friend, posing as a +1, hovered discreetly in the crowd, ready to step in if things got out of hand. The venue was luxurious: chandeliers, live music, a red carpet leading into the ballroom. Natalie looked stunning in a shimmering gown, her eyes scanning the room, presumably searching for Elizabeth and whomever they'd enlisted for the trap. My pulse pounded as I pretended to sip my drink, aware that any moment they might slip something into it. I just had to wait, watch, and capture every detail on video for my ultimate vindication. I was ready. Sure enough, Elizabeth showed up about an hour later, wearing a sly smile. She greeted Natalie with an almost imperceptible nod. I spotted a third woman lurking nearby, dressed provocatively, who soon introduced herself to me as Monica. She offered me a drink from a nearby tray, insisting I try some special cocktail. I politely declined, feigning a slight headache as an excuse. Minutes later, I noticed Elizabeth whispering to Monica, who glanced in my direction before discreetly pouring something into a fresh glass. They were bold, I'll give them that. Elizabeth then sauntered over to me, acting like an old friend, and handed me the spiked drink. Meanwhile, Natalie pretended to be engaged in conversation across the room, stealing nervous looks our way. My heart hammered as I accepted the glass, holding it in my hand for a moment before secretly dumping its contents into a potted plant. The hidden camera caught everything: the exchange of glances, the sly approach, the spiking of my drink. If they thought they had me cornered, they were wrong. I continued to mingle, carefully avoiding any beverages not directly poured in front of me. My lawyer friend watched from a distance, nodding in confirmation. As the night wore on, I noticed Natalie growing restless. She finally approached me, asking if I felt dizzy or unwell. Her voice dripped with false concern. I played along, mentioning I was feeling a little off. Nothing too dramatic, just enough to feed their expectations. Elizabeth hovered nearby, offering to help me sit down or get some air. I allowed them to guide me toward a quieter corridor, camera still recording. Monica appeared at the end of the hallway, phone in hand, ready to snap compromising photos. The plan, clearly, was for me to stumble around and look guilty while they staged some damning scene, but I had no intention of letting them win. I stumbled intentionally, making it appear as though the drug was taking effect, when in reality, I was sober and fully alert. Elizabeth gave a signal, and Monica moved closer, pressing herself against me as if we were in some intimate embrace. Natalie stood behind her, phone raised to capture it all. My stomach twisted with disgust, but I played the part, letting them think they had succeeded. Their triumphant smirks would almost completely forever vanish the moment I revealed the real evidence stacked against them. Back in the main ballroom, I discreetly signaled my lawyer friend, who brought over 2 security guards. I told them there was a potential case of drink spiking happening, and they quietly accompanied me as I confronted Elizabeth and Natalie. I revealed the hidden camera in my jacket and announced that I had footage of every last maneuver they'd attempted, every text, every plan, every drugged drink. Elizabeth's smug facade cracked instantly, and she tried to snatch the camera from my jacket. The guards intervened, restraining her as she lashed out. Natalie's face paled, and she stammered pathetically about how it was all a misunderstanding. Without missing a beat, I pulled out my phone and played back some of the recorded conversations, the damning evidence echoing through the speakers. A small crowd gathered, including a few of Natalie's co-workers, their jaws dropping at the twisted scheme unraveling before them. Monica tried to slip away, but one of the guards stopped her. My lawyer friend stepped forward and formally stated that we intended to press charges for conspiracy, assault, and defamation. The entire room seemed to freeze in shock. My heart thundered as I realized my revenge was finally right at hand. In the weeks that followed, Natalie tried every tactic imaginable to save face. She sobbed, claiming she had been manipulated by Elizabeth, that she never truly wanted to hurt me. She even announced she was pregnant, insisting the child was mine, but my resolve never wavered. I demanded a paternity test, which eventually proved that Aaron was the father. Even then, Natalie begged for forgiveness, swearing it had all been a colossal mistake. My self-respect wouldn't allow me to entertain her lies any longer. I filed for divorce, armed with more than enough evidence to protect myself financially and legally. Elizabeth faced criminal charges alongside Monica for their roles in the conspiracy, while Natalie's reputation imploded when the truth spread through our social circles. I stood tall, unflinching, knowing I owed them no forgiveness. I seized the satisfaction of knowing they had reaped what they sowed. Now, reflecting on it all, I feel neither pity nor regret. Their actions were unforgivable, and I delivered the revenge they earned. People often say closure is about letting go, but in this case, closure came from ensuring they could never harm me again. And to me, that's justice. I wouldn't have it otherwise.